The committee will resume its hearing, and I now call officers from the National Anti-Corruption Commission. Welcome, Commissioner. Commissioner, would you like to make an opening statement before we go to questions?
I should just say it's the CEO.
But, sorry,
okay.
My notes are a little wrong. I apologise.
No, that's okay. Look, we've provided a statement to the Secretariat, and so what I thought I'd do is just mention a few parts of it.
Of course, I think that's a good idea, and then we'll go to questions.
Take up too much of your time.
Thanks.
So what I've said in the statement that's being tabled is that the Commission's been in operation for nearly 21 months and continues to deliver on its mission to enhance integrity in the Commonwealth public sector through its two main lines of operation: deterring corrupt conduct through detection, investigation and exposure, preventing corrupt conduct through education and engagement. I'm also covering in the open statement that the Commission appointed Mr Geoffrey Nettle, ACKC, as its independent reconsideration delegate on the 13th of December to reconsider whether to investigate the matters that the 6 referrals that came from the Robodebt Royal Commission. And Mr Nettle delivered his report on the 10th of February, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. I'll just make a comment about that further. As at the 19th of March 2025, the Commission's conducting 34 preliminary investigations as part of its assessments process, 33 corruption investigations, one of which has already resulted in a prosecution with a plea of guilty, and another is at the procedural fairness stage. We finalised 7 investigations when it became clear that the corrupt conduct would not occur, and we're overseeing or monitoring 14 investigations by other agencies, and there's still the legacy matters from 22 legacy matters from ACLI. We released on the 26th of February a 20-month summary of key activities and operational undertakings by the Commission, and I've attached it as a copy to this opening statement. That also identifies that of our current investigations, 8 relate to one or more former or current parliamentarians, 5 relate to one or more former or current parliamentary staffers, 4 relate to one or more contractors or consultants, 15 relate to one or more senior officials, SES and above, 6 relate to one or more law enforcement officials, 14 relate to procurement, 5 relate to recruitment, 4 relate to the border, 4 relate to law enforcement misconduct, 3 relate to grants and 4 relate to entitlements. Now that doesn't all add up because some of them are in multiple categories and others are not mentioned here. The other things to note is that on 27th of November last year, the Commission signed a memorandum of understanding, MOU, with the Parliament in relation to parliamentary privilege, which was an important milestone. And on the 7th of March this year, the Commission issued an open letter to prospective election participants drawing attention to the corruption risks and vulnerabilities that can arise in the context of a federal election. And that letter addressed the use of parliamentary resources, use of official information, public sector appointments, grants, government advertising and donations and other gifts. And it also repeats the Commission's advice that it's inappropriate to announce a referral to the Commission for collateral, including political purposes. And finally, the point that I was going to make is that the Commission is now, subsequent to the public announcement about the outcome of the Nettle report, making arrangements to assure the impartial and fair investigation of the referrals from the Royal Commission, as it did with the appointment of Mr Nettle as independent reconsideration delegate. The Commissioner and those Deputy Commissioners who were involved in the original decision not to investigate the referrals will not be involved in the investigation, and I've put in some details there about the Commission is currently finalising the structure of the investigation team. So that's all I wanted to mention. I'll leave the rest for you to read at a later point.
Thanks, Mr Reid, and we thoroughly enjoyed your letter. So thank you for sending it. I'm going to hand the call to Senator Shoebridge to begin with, and then we'll come back to you if you have questions, Senator Scott.
Thanks, Chair. I think, Mr. Reid, you also indicate that in relation, I think under the heading Transparency and Secrecy, you say that the Commission will only conduct public hearings in exceptional circumstances, and you say they have not arisen yet?
Yes, that's correct.
How many matters are being investigated at the point where in how many investigations has the question of whether or not exceptional circumstances have been met? How many?
So each corruption investigation, depending on how far it goes, will get to a point where there will be potentially private hearings as under the Act, and we've identified here, and I didn't read the stats out, but that there are currently private hearings in 7 investigations involving a total of 32 witnesses during 26 hearing days, and so that's within that group of 33 corruption investigations. Now, some of those might get to the point of exceptional circumstances, but none have to date.
All right. But in how many cases has there been consideration of whether or not exceptional circumstances exist and the conclusion that they don't?
Well, what I think I've said in here is that we haven't got to that. It hasn't arisen as yet.
Well, has the question of whether exceptional circumstances exist been considered, or does that mean that it's been considered and it's been found there haven't been exceptional circumstances?
Well, it just hasn't arisen. I think that's what we're saying.
In no case has there been found to be exceptional circumstances. All right. And we're talking 33 corruption investigations that are ongoing, 7 that have concluded. So
yes.
is that the...
Well, been finalised.
All right. So there's 40, 0 out of 40 was found to have exceptional circumstances.
That's correct.
And there are 34 preliminary investigations?
Now, they're part of the assessment process, so we need to understand that that's before a decision is made as to whether there is a corruption issue and or
so
serious or systemic corruption.
The question of exceptional circumstances hasn't been considered in those yet?
No.
Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah.
But of the 40 where there either are ongoing or concluded investigations, 0 out of 40 were found to have exceptional circumstances. Could I ask you about matters in relation to conflict of interest?
Yes.
Here in particular, I know that you provided answers to questions on notice about conflict of interest in relation to defence, and you provided them in AE 25061. Partly in answer to that, you provided some correspondence that the Commissioner sent to the Attorney-General on the 11th of August. Did you bring that with you? Sorry. I have a copy if you need one.
Sorry, this is
the answer that was provided in question AE 25061.
Yeah. So that correspondence,
the attached correspondence.
That was the correspondence that the Commissioner sent to the Attorney-General as the first declaration of interests.
On the 11th of August.
On the 11th of August 2023.
Yeah. Chair, if you want a copy, I've got one. In that correspondence, the Commissioner indicated that he has service in the ADF Reserve.
That's right.
As at the 11th of August 2023, he was a Major General in the ADF Reserve, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And is that in the active reserve?
It's an honorary role, and let me just, come back.
Well, is the
role.
Major General position an honorary role?
He holds a commission with the rank of Major General in the ADF Reserve. It's an honorary role. It's not in the command structure, has no decision-making or policy determination, and it could be seen as the equivalent to an emeritus professor. It's the sort of commission that governors in states of Australia would hold. And in previous days, it used to be described as the inactive reserve.
All right. Is the commission in writing?
I'd have to take that on notice.
Or if so, can you provide it to the committee? I assume you'll take that on notice, Mr. Reid?
Yeah, I'll take that on notice.
Major General is, I think, the third highest rank in the ADF, in the Army, is that right?
I don't know.
You say that despite having a commission of Major General, that the Commissioner is not in the command structure.
No.
Is the Commissioner, has he sworn an oath of service?
Sorry?
Has he sworn an oath of service?
I don't know. I'd have to take that on notice.
Because the oath of service requires obedience with orders and directions. Do you know if he's subject to such an oath?
I wouldn't. I'd have to take that on notice.
All right. Does the honorary, you say it's an honorary commission, but does the commission of Major General, does it permit or provide any entitlements to the Commissioner?
Not that I'm aware of.
Does he have access to army messes?
Sorry?
Does he have access to army messes? You know, the canteens, officer-level canteens?
Messes. I'm not sure. I'd have to take that on notice.
Does he have access to military facilities that wouldn't be available to a non-commissioned person?
He would be invited to events that would be associated with military facilities, but I don't know whether he has specific access.
Or would you take that on notice?
I'd take that on notice.
Has the Commissioner, since taking on the role of Commissioner, been entertained or had the benefit of entertainment, including food and dinners, with the ADF?
I'm not aware of any, but I'll take that on notice as well.
Has the Commissioner attended any events in the uniform of the Major, in his uniform as Major General, since taking on the role of Commissioner, and if so, on what occasions and at which
I'd have
places?
to take that on notice as well.
The correspondence of the 11th of August 2023 seems to indicate that the Commissioner does not believe that there is any relevant conflict of interest in him holding the commission of Major General in the Army Reserves and general referrals in relation to defence. Am I reading that correctly?
That's correct, because they're honorary positions.
The one transparency expert, Geoffrey Watson, has publicly given the opinion that, in fact, because, well, if a position is honorary and somebody does it because of their connection with an organisation and not for remuneration, that far from that lessening a conflict of interest, it raises even greater concerns about conflict of interest because it's obviously done because of a person's emotional or other commitment to the organisation. Have you raised that with the Commissioner?
No, I'm not sure that that would be correct, but I'm not going to question somebody's judgment. If that's what Geoffrey Watson thinks, then I just have to accept that that's what he thinks.
Well, he's not just anybody. He's a senior counsel with a
I'm aware
strong
of who
public
he is.
public profile, considering matters of transparency and conflicts of interest, isn't he? He's not just anybody.
But look, I'm happy to take it on notice as a question, but from my perspective, working at the National Anti-Corruption Commission, these issues are not the issues of the day. And what I'm saying by that is we don't spend time considering
conflicts of interest.
These sorts of access issues. We're very concerned about conflicts of interest, and we think we've got quite a robust system in place.
Well,
it's obviously been changed as a result of the inspector's report from last year, and we think that that system is working.
Well, you see, if you have a commission as Major General, you're a member of the ADF, aren't you? That's what it means. You're a member of the ADF.
I'll just repeat that it's an honorary position.
Does the fact that it's honorary change the fundamental fact that if you have a commission with the ADF, you're a member of the ADF?
I'm happy to take that on notice, Senator.
Is there some exclusion from the Defence disciplinary regulations by reason of the honorary commission, and if so, how does it arise? Mr. Reid?
Sorry?
Is there some exclusion that the Commissioner has from the Defence disciplinary provisions that are in part set out in the Defence disciplinary regulations? Is there an exclusion for Major General Brereton to the Defence disciplinary obligations? If there is, can you identify on what basis it arises? Mr. Reid?
I'll take that on notice.
Minister, do you believe that the Commissioner can be a member of the ADF and hold a commission with the ADF as a Major General and not have the at least potential for the perception of a conflict of interest in dealing with corruption referrals from the ADF?
Thank you for the question, Senator. All officials of the Australian government entities are required to disclose and manage any material personal interests that relate to the affairs of the entity under the Public Governance, Performance and Accountability Act framework. We've got the CEO of the Commission here. They're the accountable authority, and as the Commission just said, they're required to establish and maintain appropriate systems of management of conflicts of interest within the entity, and it's, I think, appropriate for the Commissioner, the CEO, to answer those questions.
Mr. Reid, has Commissioner Brereton undertaken any duties as in his capacity as a Major General in the ADF since assuming the role as Commissioner of the NACC, and if so, which?
I'm not aware of any, but I'm happy to take that on notice.
Yep. Has he sought any leave or absence, or advised you of any absence from the office in order to undertake duties or other activities with the ADF since he has?
He's taken 2 days annual leave to attend one of the facilities in the Blue Mountains and address the staff up there, primarily about the activities of the National Anti-Corruption Commission. But he did that as annual leave.
When you say one of those, is that a defence facility in the Blue Mountains? And do you know if he did that in his capacity as a Major General wearing the uniform of a Major General?
I don't know.
Will you take that on notice?
Yeah, happy to take it on notice.
The Commissioner said in his in the correspondence that there are a number of agencies and individuals within the Defence Department where he had an affiliation, and he gave the example of the Royal New South Wales Regiment, the University of New South Wales Regiment, the Sydney University Regiment,
Yep.
and his work with the Inspector General of the ADF, where his affiliation was such that he thought there was a conflict of interest or a potential conflict of interest or the perception of a conflict of interest, and to that extent he would not involve himself in decision making. That's what he said to the Attorney General
Yes,
in the
and
11th
that's
of August
correct.
2023. That, of course, is the same formula that the Commissioner used to get himself in a lot of hot water regarding the Robodebt referral, isn't it? Which was found to be an inadequate response to a conflict of interest by both the inspector and by the retired federal court judge who was engaged by the inspector. Do you remember that?
So, yeah, of course I do. So the inspector and the advice from Alan Robertson identified that there had been a mistake of fact or law, which under the NACC Act is included in a provision about office misconduct, or if it were at the organisational level, maladministration by the Commission. And so that finding is clear, it's public, it's been addressed. The recommendation that the inspector made was that we, or the Commissioner, delegate to an appropriate person the reconsideration of the decision that has occurred. And we're now at the point of establishing an investigation team to undertake that investigation that was recommended, or sorry, decided by Mr Nettle. So I think what we're referring to has been canvassed in, not just in public, but also in parliamentary hearings previously, the PJC NACC, and we've identified that he accepts that there was a mistake of fact or law, and that meant that he engaged in officer misconduct, and as a result we have changed the approach, particularly the approach in the referrals area in the NACC senior assessment panel, and we provided that as part of a question on notice, the changes, and they're in place and operating very effectively.
You see, but the mischief that the inspector found was that Commissioner Brereton had involved himself in a variety of activities in relation to the Robodebt referral, including officer meetings, consideration of the matter, and had only excluded himself from the final decision making, and that was, as you point out, erroneous, an error of law, and officer misconduct. Yet it's exactly the same formula that the Commissioner said that he would be using to deal with the conflicts of interest involving these involving defence matters, which cut across those regiments and individuals that he had close association with. Did Commissioner Brereton have a role at any point in any referral involving any of those entities or any individuals with which he had a close association in defence prior to the decision making of matters?
Look, I think the short answer is no. We've identified to the ABC that there were 6 referrals relating to defence that the Commissioner has recused himself from.
But you see, if the Commissioner had recused himself in accordance with his practice before the findings of the Robodebt, and B, in accordance with his correspondence of the 11th of August to the Attorney General in relation to those matters, he would have only recused himself from decision making. Have you reviewed those matters, the 6 matters where the Commissioner stood aside, to determine whether or not, in a similar way to which the Robodebt referral was...
it's absolutely clear.
Let me finish.
Let
me finish, Mr. Reid. I'll start again.
Senator Shoebridge.
I'll start again. We now know that there are 6 matters involving defence. where the Commissioner now says that because of a conflict or perceived conflict of interest, he recused himself. We also know that in the correspondence of the 11th of August 2023, that the Commissioner said he would only recuse himself from decision-making, the same error he committed in relation to Robodebt. We also know that he was persuaded of the correctness of that position, although it was found to be wrong by the inspector, up until such time as the inspector provided the final report. Did he engage in anything other than decision-making in relation to those 6 defence referral matters where he concluded there was a conflict of interest and recused himself from decision-making?
As I was saying, it's absolutely clear that he was not involved in the deliberations or decisions of any of those 6 matters that he recused himself from. Absolutely clear.
Did any of those recusal actions or any of those referrals live before the inspector provided her report to the Commissioner in relation to the Robodebt matter?
The matters that he's recused himself from have been matters that, from my understanding, have occurred since the inspector's report, consistent with what the NACC and the Commissioner agreed would change as a result of the inspector's report. And we've published in the response to a question on notice that process and the changes that were made to the National Anti-Corruption Commission Senior Assessment Panel terms of reference. So it's absolutely clear what they are, how they'll be dealt with, and those 6 were dealt with through that amended process.
So you're saying that all 6 of
Senator
those...
Shoebridge, I do have to share the call in a moment. I'm trying to give you an extended amount of time, but just letting you know.
You're saying all 6 of those matters, their reference to the Commission post-dated the inspector's report in relation to Robodebt. Is that your evidence, Mr Reid?
Well, matters come in over a period of time and take time to get into a point where there would be a consideration by the NACC Senior Assessment Panel. It can take a reasonable period of time. So when they were considered by the NACC Senior Assessment Panel, the Commissioner recused himself. He did not participate in the deliberations. He did not participate in the decision-making process. They were decided by a deputy.
How many referrals has the NACC received in relation to defence since it commenced?
I'm happy to take that on notice. What we said to the ABC journalist was that it wasn't appropriate to provide details of any of those, but I'm happy to take that question of number on notice.
Well, I don't know at the time, Chair.
Yeah, thanks. I think we'll have time to come back to you, Senator Scarr.
Sure. Mr Reid, good to have the opportunity to ask questions of NACC. It's been problematic, not NACC's fault, but I'll take my fair share of the blame anyway. You said, and I wrote down the phrase you said in answer to Senator Shoebridge's question. You said it was absolutely clear. That was the phrase you used, that there was no involvement in relation to those defence matters where the Commissioner's recused himself. How can you... I was interested in how emphatic you were in terms of your response.
Yes.
So clearly it's a matter you've looked into quite deeply. How can you be absolutely clear?
Because when you look at what the Commission provided in answer to the supplementary budget estimates question of conflicts of interest mechanism 24-220, we identified that the National Anti-Corruption Commission Senior Assessment Panel terms of reference have been amended. There's a copy of them there. It's quite clear the mechanism around conflicts of interest, and so that members must, at the outset of each meeting, verbally disclose any personal interest or relationship relevant to any matter to be considered at the meeting, even if the interest or relationship is not such as, in the member's opinion, to give rise to a conflict of interest. And then further down, it says, a member making a disclosure must also declare whether, in the member's opinion, the interest or relationship amounts to a conflict of interest, actual or perceived. The NSAP may discuss and the chair may rule where a disclosed interest of relationship is such as to amount to an actual or perceived conflict of interest. Where it is the chair making a declaration, the chair will vacate the chair and appoint a deputy commissioner to assume the chair and rule on the matter. All such declarations and rulings must be recorded in the minutes. Where a member declares or the chair rules that a member has an actual or perceived conflict of interest, the member will not participate in consideration of the matter and will leave the meeting while the matter is discussed and determined, and the minutes must record the departure and return of the member. And that's being applied.
Okay, so you're saying the system itself necessarily means that you get that outcome at that early stage.
That's right. I mean, we've had these 6 examples that we have identified.
Yeah.
It wasn't something that was, found in a different way and presented to us. And to me, that says the system is working.
Okay. And it arose in the the consideration of the issue arose in the ordinary course of application of the policy and systems.
Right. That's right, because it's a very, it's a procedure that is adhered to within the organisation in the steps that you go through from the point of referral. Most matters are decided at the triage level, which doesn't come to the notice of the NACC Senior Assessment Panel. Yeah. It's only, they're called the Tier 1 matters, it's only the Tier 2 matters, which is less than 10%, that would go to the assessment panel for consideration, and then that's where all of the statutory office, the Commissioner, the Deputy Commissioners, senior staff of the Commission meet, and this is the procedure that is followed at each of those meetings. That has been changed as a result of the inspector's report and is adhered to.
Okay, thank you. I should say, before I ask this next series of questions, I had the fortune of being chair of the ACLI committee, so there were some issues in relation to assessing the ACLI committee in terms of assessing that Commission's performance that arose from time to time, and there were some interesting discussions as to the appropriateness or not of certain key performance indicators in the context of the work of an anti-corruption commission.
I'm very familiar with that.
So I'm interested to know on that basis, where are you up to in terms of working out what are the appropriate KPIs to apply? I guess firstly generally in terms of what's an appropriate KPI, but secondly then assessing the hurdle rates for performance, which I think can be problematic at times because of the nature of the work you're undertaking.
Yeah, and they're challenging issues, particularly for a new organisation. Yeah. And so we've decided to take a step-by-step approach. I mean, ACLI got criticised by the ANAO as well in terms of how many matters it had open and how slowly matters were closed. It came to this committee and there was certainly debate. Well, sorry, not this committee, to the, though it may well have been in estimates as well, but to the oversight committee, and there was debate about, just the breadth of those performance indicators. So when the Commission, just before the Commission commenced, we had the opportunity of determining what would be the initial performance indicators. So there's 3 in this current, under this current corporate plan. and they will continue into the new financial year, and they're in our portfolio budget statement, and they're fairly straightforward at the moment. Our Audit and Risk Committee were very strongly of the view that it was better if we took a stepwise progression to it, because, for instance, one of them relates to the percentage of investigations finalised within 2 years. Now, we haven't been in operation for 2 years, and the first investigations didn't commence until around September 2023. And so, whilst, you know, that means that we've already identified 7 have been finalised, but the nature of investigations done by these sorts of bodies take time, they're complex, and therefore the likelihood is that matters could take longer than that time period to complete, particularly if you're going through to a finalisation with a report that needs to be produced at the end of it. So they're quite straightforward at the moment, which is that percentage of referrals assessed within 90 days, and that's an expected performance result of 80%. And at the moment that's on track. The percentage of investigations finalised within 2 years, but that's at a 60% level, and that's on track with the 7 that we've done. And then the number of corruption prevention and education products and engagements, which is set at 100, and we're on track at the moment to easily complete that. So that will mean that over time we will need to increase the number and nature of those performance indicators. But the first year's operations, we were looking just at percentage, the mean of, what was the average completion time, to inform then the setting of these ones that we set in 24-25 and will apply in 25-26. So we haven't got to the point where we're trying to look at complex performance measures, but that will come with time. I mean, I was the CEO of the New South Wales ICAC from its 30th anniversary through to its 35th, and they had more complex and sophisticated performance measures, but that was on the basis they had a long history of understanding how long it took to do investigations, those sorts of issues.
So when I reflect on those KPIs, given the previous experience I had with previous Commissioner Hinchcliffe,
yes,
who I think did a wonderful job. Mm-hmm. I'll put that on the record again. I think I put it on the record. I'll put it on the record again. What immediately strikes me is the corollary, if you like. So 80% need to be triaged within 90 days. Assessed, within, well, something more, I guess, within 90 days. How do you measure the 20% that's left in terms of it being resolved within an appropriate period?
Well, it's always going to be an outlier, and that's...
Because sometimes they're always they may be the more difficult,
absolutely,
more challenging cases, but they could also be the more important ones.
That's true. And what happens in these assessment processes, the triage process is quite binary. Is it a Commonwealth official?
Yeah.
Is there a corruption issue? And a lot of what comes through the door can be excluded at that point. When you move the roughly 10% across into the next stage of assessment, you've got to do a lot more work. And this is where preliminary investigations come in, and as I identified earlier, we've got 34 of those underway at this point, and they can take a reasonable period of time because they can involve notices being served to obtain further information to try and define the corruption issue. So when you move into that phase, you are talking about much larger periods of time. But the numbers overall drawn, the expected performance result of, assessment within 90 days is largely being those matters in triage. They drag down the length of the Tier 2 assessments. But, this is a business that has been operating for roughly 21 months, and we're still working through the timeframes around these sorts of matters, and there will definitely be outliers, and that's the 20%. Now, if we become clearer about how we would measure, or what a KPI that might be around that would be, we may end up having to set a time limit for an assessment process, and then you start being marked much more critically in terms of, your success or failure.
And then the other KPI, the 60% measure, within 2 years?
Because when that was set, we'd been in operation for 12 months. The investigative process had only been underway for roughly 9 months, and therefore there was a sense that we needed to put something forward, and therefore we made it a finalisation target within 2 years for 60%, and again there'll be outliers. So that's the area as the organisation matures, where as we finalise or complete investigations, that we will get a much better understanding of how long it takes to do an investigation. So at ICAC it was quite often 3 years in that sort of order. And we
which is again, when we were, and these were public inquiries, when I was a member on the select committee looking at the legislation establishing NACC, and we received evidence from people who'd been through anti-corruption type investigations, and some people have been exonerated, and one of the issues raised was having such a matter hanging over you for an extended period of time can be quite difficult.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that issue?
I mean, the difficulty with corruption is it's a difficult area to investigate. It's challenging because it's usually conducted in secret. Its hallmarks are confidential communications, and this is out of the opening address. An inscrutable exercise of power. It often involves complex pathways of deception and deceit, and so finding, testing, challenging and unravelling these necessarily takes time. And under none of the models, used by other entities do we see that any of those decisions are ever made public, because, of course, what you're trying to do is investigate something that's attempted to be hidden. So the challenge then is saying, well, you are, and not all of that time individuals are aware that they are being investigated, because there can be a covert period which can take a reasonable period of time before you go overt. But where it has become overt and individuals are aware, persons of interest are aware, then there is a challenge in terms of the length of time that it can take to actually complete that investigation or bring it to finality. And I think because of the experiences of other commissions around Australia, we've ended up having to, at the very beginning, introduce witness welfare, witness liaison officers to address some of these issues, the stresses that some people face during the processes of an organisation like the Commission. That only emerged in the last 6 months of when I was at ICAC, so it hadn't been in place for nearly 35 years of their operations. But the experience of both ICAC and IBAC in Victoria and others was that you have to try and address the issues that are surrounding witnesses that are being investigated by organisations like this once they know that they're being investigated. And so witness liaison becomes quite an important tool in the toolkit. So you don't try and make them go forever, but, you know, by necessity and with the number of investigations we're undertaking, they will take time.
So I did note that in your statement that you'd recruited 3 witness liaison officers, which I was initially quite surprised at the number. But is that a response to the demand from witnesses, or?
It was actually our desire, when we were doing the private hearings that I referred to earlier, and it wasn't just in relation to the private hearings, but it becomes more intense as a result of private hearings. But, you know, there would be persons of interest that we would be investigating, and when you undertake things like executing search warrants or bringing people in for statements, there's, you know, quite a lot of emotional stress attached to that, and of course mental health issues that might emerge or may have existed that emerge in that process. So the witness liaison officers have turned out to be very important. The challenge is holding on to people in those sorts of roles. So we've initially started with 1 permanent, and then we ended up bringing in another temporary person for 12 months. And then as a result of some health issues, we ended up having to bring in the 3rd person to take over some of those duties. And so you probably need, you know, at least 2 people for the number of matters that we're dealing with and the number of witnesses that potentially emerge out of those processes.
But there's a distinction between a witness liaison officer and a witness support service, presumably.
Well, the thing is that the witness...
How do you define the line?
Oh, look, it's quite clear that we're not meant to be providing the actual, you know, psychological support to those individuals. What we've got to try and do is ascertain who's most at risk, what sort of service could we put them in contact with, and so we've have a contractual arrangement with one service provider, and then we provide people the opportunity to access that service, and we pay for that access. Now, there's a lot of people in this area of corruption activity that don't have any interest at all in those sorts of services, but there are vulnerable people that you come across that do need it, and none of us want to see anybody suiciding or even suicide ideation.
No, it was an issue that was considered by the Select Committee. Can I ask you, in relation to the activities of the inspector, which was also something we considered as a Select Committee, I'm interested to understand how, from your perspective, the inspector's discharging their statutory role to conduct an audit type activity to ensure that NACC is acting in accordance with the law and best practice. How's that occurring in practice, in terms of that audit as opposed to the complaints being made?
So most of it at the moment is coming through complaint. Right. We actually initiated our own audit of our evaluation process to look at the nature of matters that had been triaged out, and provided that to the inspector. So I think over time we will move further on from the complaint issue, but that's been quite an active process because people complain regularly about what we have done or not done in relation to their referral. And some of those go to the inspector, some of those then come back to us from the inspector, others she deals with. I think she has described that in her annual report without referring them to us. But she's very active and very clear that she has the ability to hold us to account for how we've actually undertaken the complaints. So as I said, I think the audit function will become more over time than it is at the moment.
Okay, all right. And what did your own internal audit of, again, to use your phrase, I think you said matters triaged out, what did that indicate?
So that meant that these matters were not proceeding to the Tier 2 assessment, which was the more detailed assessment.
So what was, sorry, I should have been more particular on my question, what was the result of the audit?
So the result of the audit were a small number of those triage matters that we felt we could have dealt with in a better way, but we didn't find any matters where there had been, this from my memory, a wrong decision made. That was what I was particularly keen to understand, because the inspector has clearly pointed out to us where she believed that there were errors in our triage process, and we've had to address those. And as I said, is active in that space.
So I've just got two more questions. The first is the finalisation of matters that were transitioned from ACLI to NACC.
Yep.
And there was always an issue, well, a thought in my mind, how successfully would those matters be triaged from ACLI across to NACC, and whether or not there'd be any impact on the investigation process by the transition from Authority 1 to Authority 2. So is there anything you can comment in that regard?
Well, I suppose I wasn't in ACLI, but I think we're effectively dealing with what was quite a reasonable number of matters that were transitioned across, the 22 matters. So at the moment, there has been 7 of them are still active investigations of the 22.
What's the oldest of those matters? Even just in ballpark figures, is there one that's ongoing for say 5 years or 4 years or?
Okay.
Okay. All right.
My colleague here was in ACLI, so that's why I've turned to him. So look, I'm happy enough to take that on notice, because some of the matters were had a reasonable age when they were transitioned, and here we are 21 months.
That's why I was curious. No, my last question, one of the matters I was interested to see measurement of after NACC had some time of being in operation was the number of matters which were referred to NACC and found to be outside the jurisdiction of NACC. So there was always a query as to whether or not you'd be inundated. Everyone who had a complaint about anything would be making an application to you. What's the experience over the last 21 years? 21 months.
21 months.
You might be there in 21 years.
It could well be.
What's it
I
indicate?
won't be, but others might be.
I won't be.
But so what we've identified, and it's in the opening address, is that in the first year of operations we received a total of 3,190 referrals, and in the whatever it is now, 9 months since then, since the 1st of July 2024, we've received another 1,636 referrals. And so in that sense, the number has reduced from that first year's operation. I couldn't predict what the number would be at the end of this financial year. We've still got another quarter to go. All right, okay. Sorry, there's breaking news here. We might be able to answer that question that you asked about what was the oldest of the transition matters.
Yes, Senator Scott, Peter Ratcliffe, General Manager of Operational Capabilities. The oldest matter that transitioned from the Lake Act to the NACC Act is an operation which commenced on the 1st of September 2021, and it's currently pending finalisation. There have been 2 convictions achieved, and and we're just writing up basically after the court.
Excellent.
After the court process.
Excellent. No, that's good. So
sorry, I lost the train there.
yeah, so since 1 July 2024, a further 1,636 referrals.
Yes.
So there's sort of been a step change, I think,
Yes.
from the first year. People are discovering the jurisdiction, etc. 1,257 were excluded at the triage stage.
Yes.
So the reasons for that exclusion, obviously a key reason can be jurisdiction.
Yeah, so often, is it actually a Commonwealth official that they're talking about? Is there a corruption, a viable corruption issue in there? And
why else would a matter be excluded at the triage stage?
Well, often it's just completely irrelevant to our jurisdiction. I mean, that's just the nature. People, to a degree, we're probably going to be a place of last resort.
Yeah, okay.
People who are angry about government, they may not go to the Ombudsman, or they might go to the Ombudsman and also come to us. So that's the sort of nature.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much. Senator Shoebridge.
Oh, thanks, Chair. Mr. Reid, the compulsory retirement age for the Army Reserves is 65 years.
Mm-hmm.
I believe Commissioner Brereton is 67 years of age.
Mm-hmm.
To retain his commission, did he seek, or was he required to seek, the consent or permission or concurrence of the Chief of the Defence Force?
I'd have to take that on notice, Senator.
Is his retention as a commissioner, is the retention of his commission as a Major General the subject to any ongoing concurrence or consent or permission from the Chief of the Defence Force?
Senator Shoebridge, that's not a question for the NACC. That's a question for Defence.
No. This utterly relates to a potential conflict of interest between the Commissioner.
Whether the question isn't relevant to the NACC estimates.
Are you aware, Mr. Reid, of whether or not his retention of his commission as a Major General is the subject of any ongoing permission, consent or concurrence of the CDF?
Not that I'm aware of, but I don't know that. I'd have to take it on notice.
Thank you. At least we know some of the costs to the NACC of the adverse finding by the inspector of how Commissioner Brereton dealt with the Robodebt matter include the cost of engaging Mr. Nettle.
Mm-hmm.
And that was more than $205,000, is that right?
I think it was around that figure. Let me just quickly...
Right. We got some answers earlier today which says Mr. Nettle has been paid $185,000 gross for his work.
$206,800 gross.
$206,800
gross.
And did the $206,800 that was paid to Mr. Nettle for his reconsideration, did that come from the NACC budget?
Of course, yes.
Yep. Have there been any other external payments made by the NACC because of the adverse finding by the inspector against
So the
Commissioner
AGS
Brereton?
supported Mr. Nettle to keep it at arm's length from the Commission.
And did they bill you?
Their work as part of the reconsideration was $22,594.
All right. So $229,000 of external costs have been paid because of the adverse finding of the inspector.
Mm-hmm.
That's a yes?
Well, I mean, if 22,594 and 206,800 adds up to that number, then yes, that's been...
Are there any other costs that have been paid?
No.
Mr. Nettle provided his report to the Commissioner on the 10th of February 2025.
That's correct.
But there was no media release published until the 18th of February 2025.
That's correct.
What explains the delay?
So Mr. Nettle sent his report quite late on the 10th of February to the Commissioner. The Commissioner then distributed it the following day to statutory office holders and senior staff of the Commission for consideration. We then, with me being the primary person managing what was going to happen next, because as you'd be aware, Mr Nettle made the decision that we were investigating. We didn't have to make a decision following the report about whether we were going to investigate or not. Part of the delegation to Mr Nettle was to decide whether or not to investigate. So on that basis, it was then what did we have to put in place? What advice were we going to need in terms of how we would then undertake that process so that we would be in a position to be able to at least identify what we would do as a result of the decision by Mr Nettle that we were going to investigate these 6 persons of interest that were referred to us by the Royal Commission. So there were a number of procedural things we needed to do. We had to, based on our procedural fairness processes, advise those 6 people of interest. We'd done that at each step of the process up to that point.
You say that was procedural fairness, Mr Reid, but you say in your answers to questions on notice that was a standard welfare procedure. Was it procedural fairness or a standard welfare procedure?
Well, the two things are intertwined when it came to the persons of interest, which is that you're going to deliver news that was unexpected or potentially unexpected by these people who had been told around the 6th of June 2024 that they were not going to be the subject of an investigation, who were then told that the inspector was doing an investigation into how we had handled the matter, and as a result of that there would be a reconsideration. So we advised them about that occurring, and then the decision of Mr Nettle, we advised them, the fact that we were doing the reconsideration, we had advised them about, and then the outcome of the investigation we advised them about. And from our perspective, when you're dealing with any person of interest, you have to take witness welfare into account. It's not something that's you do for one person and not for another. Now, it might be ignored by those individuals. Now, when it comes to procedural fairness, and we're doing a fact sheet which will be put on our website probably tomorrow or Monday, which describes the procedural fairness provisions that we have. And therefore, what we're doing is advising people about something that is going to occur. We're trying to make sure
this is advising them about a decision that's been made. How is there an obligation of procedural fairness to advise them about a decision that's been made? Well, we
believe that it's important that we advise people about what's coming up and what's coming next, not about them reading about it in the media.
Just my final question.
Yeah.
I put an FOI in
to
request, amongst other things, the draft and any alterations to the media release that was issued.
Yes, that's correct.
We now know that the Commissioner made suggestions and amendments to the media release.
That's correct.
And you have refused to produce any drafts or any communications in relation to the media release, alleging that the media release contains deliberative material, extends beyond factual material, and includes drafting the media release included the crafting of an opinion and an evaluation of information. Is that really your view? That
I'm not the decision maker when it comes to FOI.
Draft media releases are excluded from the FOI.
I'm not the decision maker when it comes to FOI, and we've dealt with, I think, 100 to date, and it's a very active process within the organisation.
I'll make it simple. Will you provide the draft media release and any communications with the Commissioner and any alterations the Commissioner made in relation to the media release to this committee?
Well, we didn't provide it in the FOI. I'll take it on notice.
So has different rules than FOI, so we'll see how it goes. Senator Shoebridge, thank you very much, and thank you, CEO. Appreciate it. Glad we got to you in the end. That concludes today's proceedings. I thank the Minister.